He was just 10 years old, a red windbreaker, a backpack on his shoulders, and a small blue keychain swinging from the zipper. One moment, he was sitting quietly by the window of a yellow school bus. The next, he was gone. No shouts, no broken glass, no trace at all. Only an empty seat and a town left asking how a boy could vanish in broad daylight. 22 years later, the children of Springfield climb the same bus steps. The engine rumbles, the brakes hiss, and behind the wheel sits a new driver. His face is older now, but his eyes are the same, and dangling from his bag, that same blue keychain. This is the story of the boy who disappeared on his way to school, and the man who returned 2 decades later, driving the very bus that took him. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every comment, and I love seeing our community connect across the globe. The morning mist still lingered over the quiet streets of Springfield, Ohio, on a day that looked like any other. The hum of cicadas in the distance mixed with the soft creak of porch swings as the town slowly awoke. But near the edge of the cornfields, where the asphalt cracked into winding back roads, something felt different, something that would haunt the town for decades. The yellow school buses were lined up neatly outside Jefferson Elementary, their faded paint catching the first rays of sunlight. The air smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with the earthy dampness of the fields. Children's voices echoed faintly, laughter carrying across the yard. Parents stood by their cars, waving their kids off with routine gestures that felt safe, ordinary, almost eternal. But ordinary had its cracks. If one listened closely, the town's silence had an undercurrent, a tension that no one could name yet. That morning, a boy would vanish, and Springfield would never feel the same again. The sound of brakes squealing pierced the calm as one of the buses groaned forward, rattling down the road. Dust rose, dancing in the thin light. Inside, backpacks thudded against vinyl seats, the chatter of children filling the space like a song. A radio crackled faintly at the front, playing a nostalgic tune, its static merging with the uneven rumble of the engine. Michael Carter, 10 years old, sat by the window, his small hands tracing shapes in the condensation on the glass. Outside, rows of corn blurred past, golden and endless. His blue keychain, shaped like a baseball glove, swung gently from his backpack zipper. To him, it was nothing special. To the town, in the years to come, it would become a symbol. The driver coughed, adjusted the rearview mirror, and cleared his throat. The children barely noticed. But the smallest details of that moment, the mirror tilting, the driver's eyes flicking back, would later burn themselves into memories, into testimony, into unanswered questions that tore families apart. At the next stop, kids climbed aboard, their sneakers squeaking against the metal steps. Michael looked up, nodded shyly to a friend, then turned back to the window. The bus rumbled forward again, deeper into the rural roads where mailboxes leaned, paint peeling, numbers faded. Every sound, the squeak of brakes, the clatter of a loose window pane, the hiss of the engine, would years later echo in nightmares. No one realized they were watching the last ordinary moments of a boy who would disappear into silence. The road narrowed, curving between tall sycamores whose branches reached over the asphalt like heavy arms. Sunlight filtered through, flickering against the bus windows in sharp, restless patterns. The children's chatter grew quieter, lulled by the rhythm of wheels over uneven ground. Michael leaned his head against the glass, feeling the cool vibration against his cheek. He thought about recess, about the baseball game planned for that afternoon. The glove keychain shimmered faintly in the sunlight, swaying as if it, too, were waiting for something. The driver slowed as they approached an intersection where an abandoned farmhouse sat crooked in the distance. Its roof sagged, windows broken, the front porch cluttered with weeds. Kids always whispered about it, dared each other to run up and touch the door on Halloween. Michael glanced at it now, but quickly looked away, uneasy. The bus groaned forward, the smell of diesel thickening inside. A pencil rolled down the aisle with each bump clattering under the seats. A girl hummed softly in the back, her tune just loud enough to be noticed, just strange enough to leave a trace of discomfort. The cornfields opened wide again, stretching endlessly to the horizon. The row seemed to close in around the bus, a tunnel of stalks bending in the wind. The hum of the engine grew louder, drowning out the small voices. And then, as the bus disappeared deeper into the fields, the town lost sight of it. For everyone else in Springfield, that morning continued like any other. Parents went to work. Radios played country songs. Store owners lifted shutters and swept sidewalks. No one knew that, on that bus, something irreversible was about to happen. Years later, people would remember the way the air felt heavy that morning, though no storm came. They would recall the faint smell of gasoline that clung longer than usual. They would replay the sound of the bus engine fading, not knowing it was the last time. For the Carter family, for the children of Springfield, for the whole town, September 18, 2003, would forever be the day Michael vanished from a school bus. Michael Carter was 10 years old when Springfield lost him. To most of the town, he was the smiling boy in a faded yearbook photo, forever frozen in time. But to those who knew him, Michael was more than the missing posters and news headlines. He was a child with dreams, fears, and the quiet determination of someone who wanted to belong. At home, mornings were always rushed. His mother, Karen Carter, worked double shifts at the diner off Main Street. She would braid Michael's hair quickly, kiss his forehead, and hand him a lunchbox packed with peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices. Michael loved when she tucked in a small note written on napkin paper. "Play hard today. I love you." He saved those notes in a shoebox under his bed, the handwriting becoming his secret treasure. Michael was shy, not the loudest boy in the classroom, but he had a way of noticing things others overlooked. He would point out cracks in the sidewalk shaped like animals, or clouds that resembled baseball gloves. His teacher once said he had an eye for details, though she worried that he sometimes drifted too far into his own world. His greatest dream was to play shortstop for the Springfield Wildcats, the local Little League team. He practiced daily, tossing a worn baseball against the side of their modest two-story house until the neighbors grew tired of the noise. His blue keychain, shaped like a glove, was a gift from his father before he left the family. Michael never talked much about that. The keychain was enough. Karen often said her son had an old soul. He asked questions that startled adults, questions about why some people disappeared, why neighbors moved away without saying goodbye, why his father never came back. His mother would smile tightly, brushing crumbs off the table, and tell him not to think too hard. But Michael kept wondering. Friends at school liked him, though he was rarely the leader. He followed more than he led, often sitting at the edge of groups, laughing at jokes, but rarely the one telling them. Yet those who played baseball with him knew his determination, how he'd dive into the dirt to stop a ball, how he'd refuse to quit, even when his knees were scraped raw. At night, before bed, Michael would stare at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to his ceiling. He whispered small prayers, though no one had taught him how. Sometimes he prayed for his father to return. Other nights he prayed for his mom to have an easier life, and on rare nights, when the loneliness felt heavy, he prayed simply not to be forgotten. On weekends, Michael often rode his bike around the quiet streets of Springfield, waving at neighbors who knew him by name. He liked to stop at Fletcher's Corner Store, where the owner sometimes gave him a free pack of baseball cards if he helped sweep the floor. He collected those cards carefully, organizing them in a binder that he guarded more closely than his homework. Michael's world was small, But to him, it was everything. His school, Jefferson Elementary, felt like a second home. The smell of sharpened pencils, the sound of lockers slamming shut, the chalk dust clinging to the blackboard, all of it wrapped around him like a rhythm he trusted. Teachers described him as dependable, the kind of student who would stay behind to stack chairs neatly, even when no one asked. But Michael carried burdens that most children didn't. The absence of his father lingered like an unanswered question, shaping his sense of self in quiet, unspoken ways. Sometimes, during baseball practice, he would glance at the bleachers, half expecting to see a figure waving back. The empty space was a reminder that his world wasn't complete. His mother tried her best, but exhaustion often dulled her smile. Michael noticed. He noticed everything: the tremble in her hands when she poured coffee late at night, the way she sighed when bills piled up on the counter. Though he never said it out loud, he felt a responsibility no child should carry, to be the reason she kept going. And yet beneath that weight, he was still a boy. He loved bubblegum, comic books, and the thrill of catching fireflies in a jar on warm summer nights. He dreamed of traveling beyond the cornfields, of seeing places he'd only glimpsed in library books: New York City skyscrapers, the Grand Canyon, maybe even the ocean. Michael was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. A boy with scraped knees and wide eyes, living in a town that didn't realize how much it loved him until he was gone. Years later, when people remembered Michael Carter, they didn't just recall the missing posters. They remembered his laugh at recess, the way he always tied his shoelaces in double knots, the way he ran home with his backpack bouncing like wings on his shoulders. They remembered the boy who should have grown up among them, but didn't. And on the morning of his disappearance, none of them knew they were about to lose him. The morning of September 18, 2003, was supposed to be unremarkable. Yet, in hindsight, Springfield residents recalled tiny fragments of that day, details that seemed ordinary then, but unsettling later. It started on the bus. Michael's classmates would later testify about small, curious things. The driver, Mr. Howard, usually greeted each child with the same monotone "morning," but that day he didn't. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting too often to the mirror. One girl swore his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the wheel, though she wasn't sure if her memory was colored by fear years later. Michael sat by the window, as always, but something about his posture stood out. He was quieter, leaning into the glass, his fingers tracing invisible shapes. His friend Tommy noticed he hadn't brought his baseball glove, even though practice was scheduled. He never missed practice, Tommy would later say, shaking his head. That wasn't Michael. As the bus rolled down County Road 12, the sound of the engine grew uneven, coughing like it was struggling. Some kids laughed, imitating the noise, but Michael didn't. He just kept staring out, his blue keychain swaying gently. At the farmhouse intersection, witnesses outside recalled something strange. The bus hesitated. Neighbors working in nearby fields said the bus pulled over briefly. The driver opened the door, though no one was scheduled to board. They remembered dust rising, the yellow door creaking open, and then shutting again. What happened in that gap of less than a minute became one of Springfield's enduring mysteries. Back at the school, teachers began to notice Michael's absence. He wasn't in his seat by 8:30. Roll call marked him unaccounted for. At first, it seemed like a mistake. Maybe he was late, maybe he was sick. But when the principal called Karen Carter's workplace and she said confused, "I put him on the bus myself," the first ripple of panic spread. By mid-morning, whispers began. Parents arriving at the diner spoke in hushed tones. "Did you hear? A boy didn't show up to class." By noon, the sheriff's office received its first official call. Michael Carter was missing. Investigators quickly searched the bus route. Children were questioned gently at the library, their voices quivering as they tried to recall details. "He waved at me," said one. "He looked sad," said another. "He was just gone," whispered a third. But the strangest detail came from a boy sitting near the back. He swore he saw Michael stand up just before the bus slowed near the farmhouse. He said Michael whispered something, too soft to hear, then glanced at the driver. The boy remembered Michael's hand tightening on his keychain, like he knew something the rest didn't. That testimony was never confirmed. Some said it was imagination, the distortion of a child's memory under stress. Others believed it was the closest thing to the truth Springfield would ever get. By evening, the town had changed. Posters were printed. Parents gripped their children tighter. The farmhouse at the intersection became a landmark of dread. And the last image of Michael, a boy with double-knotted laces, staring out of a bus window, was etched into everyone's mind. As the first search parties spread out along the bus route, unease deepened. The sheriff's deputies found no signs of struggle, no torn fabric, no dropped books, not even a footprint out of place. It was as if Michael had evaporated between one stop and the next. Parents gathered in the school gymnasium that evening. The smell of polished wood and sweat thick in the air. Karen Carter sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. She kept whispering the same phrase, "He never walked home, he never walked home," as if repeating it might summon him back. Witness accounts were confusing. A farmer swore he saw the bus door open near the old farmhouse, but no child step out. Another claimed he spotted a second figure at the edge of the road, too tall to be Michael, too quick to vanish. None of the testimonies matched perfectly, leaving investigators tangled in contradictions. Rumors spread faster than facts. At Fletcher's corner store, townsfolk whispered about kidnappers, about strangers seen loitering near the gas station weeks earlier. Teenagers added fuel, telling stories of shadows moving inside the abandoned farmhouse at night. For the first time in years, Springfield locked its doors before sundown. Inside Michael's bedroom, investigators cataloged every detail. The shoebox of napkin notes under his bed, the binder of baseball cards stacked carefully in order, the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling peeling at the edges. Nothing suggested he had run away. Everything suggested a boy who wanted to come home. But one object stood out. His baseball glove was found resting on the nightstand. The same glove he never left behind, the one he brought even when there wasn't a game. That discovery unsettled his friends most of all. "He wouldn't forget it," Tommy whispered, shaking his head. "Not Michael." In the following days, flyers with Michael's face papered telephone poles, church bulletin boards, and grocery store windows. The town's radio station interrupted songs to repeat his description. 10 years old, brown hair, green eyes, last seen on a yellow school bus wearing a red windbreaker. The announcer's voice cracked as he said, "If anyone has information." Every corner of Springfield seemed to echo with his absence. The clatter of lockers in the empty school hallway, the hollow sound of the bus brakes hissing without him stepping off, the silence of the baseball field where his teammates waited, staring at the dugout bench he never filled again. And beneath it all, one haunting truth settled in. Michael Carter hadn't just missed class. He had vanished from a place where vanishing seemed impossible. The investigation into Michael Carter's disappearance began within hours. By dawn the next day, Springfield was transformed into something unrecognizable. Cornfields turned into search grids, ditches combed by volunteers, and helicopters slicing the quiet skies with their low hum. Sheriff Daniels, already gray-haired back then, stood at the farmhouse intersection with his boots sinking into the dirt. The bus had stopped here, he knew that much. But no footprints, no dropped belongings, no signs of struggle. It was the kind of case that gnawed at logic. A child didn't just dissolve into the air. He interviewed the bus driver, Mr. Howard, again and again, The man's answers were vague. "I don't remember stopping," he said at first. Later, when pressed, he admitted, "Well, maybe I slowed down. Maybe I opened the door for a second." His story shifted like sand, and Daniels could feel the town's suspicion growing, but no evidence tied the driver directly to the disappearance. Meanwhile, Karen Carter was interviewed in her kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of untouched coffee. She repeated the same words over and over. "I saw him step onto the bus. I saw the door close." And then, nothing. Investigators scribbled notes, their pens scratching like whispers in the dim room. The farmhouse became a focal point. Officers searched inside, finding only dust, broken glass, and the faint smell of mold. Kids from town swore they saw flashlights there at night, but deputies never caught anyone. Still, the image of that sagging structure loomed over the investigation like a shadow, feeding rumors and fear. Weeks passed, and frustration mounted. Leads trickled in, most useless. A woman claimed she saw Michael at a rest stop 2 counties away. Another insisted she recognized him at a gas station in Kentucky. Each report was pursued, each one collapsed into nothing. At Jefferson Elementary, Michael's desk remained empty. Teachers placed his homework there at first, a silent hope that he might return to complete it. Eventually, the papers were collected, the desk cleared. His classmates grew restless, haunted by questions they couldn't answer. Some avoided the bus altogether, begging their parents to drive them. Sheriff Daniels tried to keep the search alive. He organized community meetings at the town hall, his voice gravelly as he urged calm. But behind his stern expression, doubt crept in. He had chased missing persons before, but this felt different. There was no ransom note, no clear motive, no body, just silence. And silence was the cruelest evidence of all. By the 3rd month, Springfield had settled into a rhythm of grief. Search parties no longer filled the cornfields, but the case lived on in hushed conversations at church, in the corner booth of the diner, in the way neighbors glanced at each other when the subject of Michael came up. Detectives brought in from Columbus tried to reconstruct the timeline. They mapped every stop of the bus, questioned every child again, but children's memories are fragile, easily bent by time and suggestion. One swore Michael had gotten off at the farmhouse. Another said he never stood up at all. Their words contradicted each other until truth itself seemed out of reach. In Michael's shoebox of napkin notes, investigators looked for clues. They wondered if he had planned to meet someone, if a name or message might be hidden between the lines. But all they found were the same words written by his mother. "Be brave. You're my sunshine. I'll see you after school." Simple love, nothing more. The baseball glove keychain was analyzed, photographed, even tested for fingerprints. Nothing unusual surfaced. It was just a keychain, yet it carried the weight of an unsolved mystery because it had been the last thing anyone saw in his hands. By spring, false leads multiplied. Letters arrived claiming responsibility, demanding money. Each was investigated, each proved fake. The cruelty of strangers exploiting a mother's pain left Karen hollow-eyed, her hope crumbling under the weight of lies. Sheriff Daniels grew desperate. He revisited Mr. Howard, the driver, pressing him harder each time. Howard's health declined, his answers more fragmented. Sometimes he insisted he saw Michael step off near the farmhouse. Other times he swore he drove straight through. His inconsistency gnawed at everyone, but without proof, Daniels couldn't act. The farmhouse was boarded up by order of the county, but teenagers still sneaked in. They painted Michael's name on the walls, left candles that melted into hardened pools of wax on the floor. To them, it was haunted, not by ghosts, but by unanswered questions. As the years passed, the case file thickened, stuffed with dead ends and fading photographs. Each page carried the weight of a town's failure. Michael Carter's face stared out from posters curled at the edges, his green eyes locked in a gaze that asked the same question everyone feared. Why couldn't you find me? And though life in Springfield limped forward, a quiet dread lingered. Parents drove their children instead of letting them ride the bus. Strangers were met with suspicion. The school bus, once a symbol of safety, had become a reminder of what could vanish in plain sight. For Karen, every squeal of brakes outside her window was a dagger. Every yellow bus rattling down the road was a cruel echo. She lived with the unbearable truth her son was gone, and no one could explain how. But deep inside the case, buried beneath years of dust and silence, lay pieces of truth waiting to surface, pieces that, decades later, would shatter Springfield all over again. 2 decades passed. Springfield changed. Stores closed. New ones opened. The farmhouse was finally torn down. But the memory of Michael Carter lingered like a scar that never faded. His case was whispered about in classrooms, retold by parents as a cautionary tale. To outsiders, it was just another small-town tragedy. To Springfield, it was the wound that never healed. Then, in the fall of 2025, whispers began again. It started quietly. A teacher at Jefferson Elementary mentioned a new school bus driver, a man with tired eyes and a quiet manner. His name was Michael. He avoided attention, kept to himself, and drove the bus with careful precision. At first, no one thought much of it. People came and went in Springfield, but then a detail spread. Someone noticed the blue keychain swinging from his bag, the one shaped like a baseball glove. The news hit the town like lightning. Could it be? After 22 years, was Michael Carter back? Karen Carter heard it first from a neighbor who knocked on her door, trembling. "Karen, I think your boy's alive." "Anna?" She laughed at the absurdity, then froze when the neighbor described the keychain, the same one she had tucked onto his backpack the morning he disappeared. When the bus pulled up the next day, Karen stood at the curb. Her breath caught as the door opened and the driver stepped down. His face was older, lined by years of survival, but his eyes, green, piercing, were the same ones she had kissed goodbye. The keychain dangled from his bag, swaying in the autumn breeze. The town erupted. Reporters swarmed Springfield, cameras flashing, headlines screaming, "Boy missing since 2003, returns as bus driver." The case that had gone cold for 2 decades was suddenly alive, and so was Michael. At first he spoke little. He confirmed his name, his identity, even provided DNA that matched his mother's. But the questions only multiplied. Where had he been? Who had taken him? Why return now? Sheriff Daniels, long retired but still haunted by the case, requested a meeting. Sitting across from Michael in the station, he studied the man's hands. Steady now, not like the boy's fidgeting fingers years ago. "You don't have to tell me everything," Daniel said quietly, "but I need to know one thing. Did you leave the bus that morning on your own?" Michael's jaw tightened. His silence stretched so long it felt like another lifetime. Finally he whispered, "No." The room chilled. The truth unraveled slowly, like threads pulled from a tightly woven cloth. Michael revealed that on that September morning in 2003, the bus driver, Mr. Howard, had stopped at the farmhouse intersection, just as witnesses recalled. But the stop hadn't been random. It had been deliberate. Howard had told Michael to come forward, his voice strangely firm. Confused, Michael obeyed. The driver then whispered something no child expected to hear. "Your father wants to see you." Michael froze. His father, absent for years, a ghost in his life, was the one thing he longed for, and the one thing he never thought he'd hear again. When the bus door opened, Michael stepped down, heart racing. Outside, instead of his father, there was a man waiting in a rusted pickup truck. Michael didn't recognize him, but the driver's hand pressed against his shoulder, urging him forward. The door shut. The bus pulled away, and that was the last Springfield saw of Michael Carter. For years he was shuttled between remote places, an old trailer near the Kentucky border, a cabin deep in West Virginia's hills. He was hidden, silenced, told that no one was looking for him. He was told his mother had given up, that Springfield had forgotten. Lies became his reality. Howard died 5 years later, leaving Michael in the care of others tied to him, people who lived off the grid, suspicious of outsiders, moving constantly. They weren't strangers to Michael after long. They became his captors, his false family. He grew up under their rules, taught to work in silence, to trust no one. But Michael never forgot. He clung to the memory of Springfield, to the image of his mother's notes in that shoebox, to the glow-in-the-dark stars above his bed. He carried the keychain everywhere, even when told to throw it away. It was his tether, his proof that he had once belonged somewhere. As a teenager, he thought of running. But fear, instilled deep, kept him still. Only in adulthood, when one of his captors fell ill, did he see his chance. He walked away, slowly at first, then faster, until the mountains spat him back into the world. Why then return as a bus driver? Michael's answer stunned the town. Because it started there, he said, and it had to end there. He wanted to face the same roads, the same routes, the same yellow bus that had swallowed him. He wanted to sit in the same seat where children once laughed beside him. And he wanted the town to see him not just as the boy who vanished, but as the man who returned. The revelation cut Springfield open again. Parents wept. Old classmates stared at him, torn between joy and disbelief. For Karen, the truth was unbearable. Her son had been so close all along, taken by someone she had trusted to protect him. The case file, once buried in dust, exploded into headlines. Michael Carter had resurfaced, and with him, a story no one could have imagined. The boy who vanished from a school bus had come back, 2 decades later, driving one. The return of Michael Carter did not bring the neat closure the town had long imagined. It brought raw emotion, grief, anger, relief, and confusion, all colliding at once. For Karen, seeing her son alive was both a miracle and a torment. She touched his face as if afraid he might vanish again, her fingers trembling over the lines time had etched there. "You're here," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're really here." But as joy swelled in her chest, so did a flood of questions. Why hadn't he run sooner? Why hadn't he tried to contact her? Each question carried its own ache. Michael, too, was conflicted. He had come back, but the Springfield he remembered no longer existed. His childhood friends were adults now, raising children of their own. The baseball field where he once dreamed of playing was overgrown, the dugout rusted. He walked through the town as if through a memory that had grown unfamiliar. At community gatherings, people approached him cautiously. Some hugged him, tears in their eyes. Others stared from a distance, whispers trailing in his wake. He looks like him, but different. What if it's not really him? Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Sheriff Daniels, weighed down by the guilt of failure, met with Michael privately. "I spent years trying to find you," he said, his voice rough, "and all that time, you were just beyond our reach." Michael listened quietly, his expression unreadable, then placed the keychain on the table between them. "You were looking in the wrong places," he said softly. The revelation about Mr. Howard ignited fury. Parents who had once waved their children onto his bus now felt betrayed beyond words. The man they trusted had stolen not only Michael's childhood, but the town's sense of safety. Vigils were held, candles flickering in the night, both to honor the boy lost and the man who returned. For Michael, the hardest moment came when he visited his childhood home. The house had aged, its paint peeling, its porch creaking. In his old room, the shoebox of napkin notes was gone, but the ceiling still held faint outlines where the glow in the dark stars had once been. Standing there, he felt both a stranger and a son. Karen joined him, tears slipping silently down her face. "I left your room the same for years," she confessed, "but eventually I had to let go. I thought you weren't coming back." Michael turned, his voice breaking for the first time. "I never let go, Mom, not once." The words shattered her. They clung to each other, two souls stitched back together by pain, by years stolen, by love that refused to die. The weeks that followed were a storm of emotions. Michael tried to rebuild a life in Springfield, but every corner of town reminded him of what was lost. At the diner, customers whispered his name as his mother poured coffee, her hands still trembling whenever someone asked, "How is he doing?" Michael walked through Jefferson Elementary one quiet afternoon. The classrooms were different now, smartboards instead of chalk, new faces instead of old ones, but in the hallway a faded photograph stopped him. It was a class picture from 2003. There he was, smiling shyly in the second row. He stared at that boy, frozen in innocence, until his vision blurred with tears. At night, sleep rarely came. Dreams carried him back to the bus, to the sound of squealing brakes, to the voice promising he would see his father. He would wake drenched in sweat, clutching the keychain as though it were a lifeline. Trauma doesn't vanish with time. It lingers, carving deep scars, invisible to the world. One evening, the town gathered for a baseball game dedicated to Michael. The field had been cleaned, the dugouts painted, the bleachers filled with neighbors. As he stood on the pitcher's mound, the crowd erupted in applause. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at the scoreboard, remembering all the games he had missed. Karen threw the ceremonial first pitch into his glove. The ball slapped against leather with a sound that echoed through the stadium, a sound that seemed to stitch time together. For the first time in years, Michael smiled, not the strained smile of survival, but the genuine grin of a boy who had finally been found. After the game, he walked home under the fading light, his mother at his side. The air smelled of grass and dust, just as it had on the day he vanished. Only now, instead of silence, there was conversation, hesitant, fragile, but real. "Do you think you can stay?" Karen asked softly. Michael paused, the keychain swinging at his side. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to disappear again." They walked on, two figures silhouetted against the twilight, each step forward, a defiance against the years stolen from them. Springfield would never forget the boy who vanished from a school bus and the man who returned 2 decades later, driving one. Michael Carter's story became more than a mystery. It became a reminder of how fragile ordinary life can be, how quickly safety can shatter. Neighbors often said the town felt divided into 2 eras, before Michael disappeared and after he returned. Parents still watched their children step onto yellow buses each morning, but their eyes lingered longer, their waves stretched further, haunted by what had once happened on a road lined with cornfields. Michael tried to live quietly, but his presence carried weight. He wasn't just a man rebuilding his life. He was a living reminder of survival, of resilience. People approached him at the grocery store, their voices trembling. "I prayed for you for years." Others simply touched his arm, too overwhelmed for words, but the greatest reflection lay not in the town, but in Michael himself. He often sat by his window at night, the hum of distant traffic carrying faintly through the glass, and thought about the boy he once was. That boy had been stolen, silenced, reshaped by fear, and yet somehow he had made it back. The keychain remained with him, worn smooth by years of his grip. Sometimes he turned it in his hands, staring at the small glove, wondering why he had clung to it for so long. Perhaps because it was proof that love endured, that even in the darkest years, a part of his childhood survived. For Karen, her son's return was both healing and heavy. She had lived 22 years with absence, and now she was learning to live with presence again, but she chose gratitude over grief. "I didn't get those years back," she told a neighbor once, "but I got my boy back. That's enough." And as autumn leaves fell around Springfield, blanketing the sidewalks in red and gold, Michael's story became something larger than the town itself. It was not just about what had been taken, but about what had been found again. Years later, Michael would sometimes walk past the old bus depot at the edge of town. The rows of yellow buses stood quiet in the early morning light, their windows fogged, their engines silent. He would pause, listening to the faint echoes of his own childhood, the laughter, the squeak of sneakers on the metal steps, the rattle of loose windows. But instead of fear, he felt resolve. He had taken back the space that once stole him. By choosing to drive a bus, he had faced the place of his disappearance and transformed it into a place of return. What had once been a prison of memory had become his act of defiance. In interviews, when asked what message he wanted to leave, Michael's answer was simple: "Don't stop looking." He meant it for parents, for neighbors, for anyone who carried the weight of loss. Because he knew better than anyone that hope, even buried under decades of silence, could still breathe. For Springfield, his survival became a story passed down like folklore. Children who hadn't even been born when he vanished grew up hearing about the boy who was lost and then found. His life became a reminder that disappearance doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes it means a beginning no one could have imagined. On the anniversary of his return, Michael stood once again with his mother outside Jefferson Elementary. The morning sun lit the building, children laughing as they climbed onto buses. Karen reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "It started here," she said softly. Michael nodded, the keychain glinting faintly in the light. "And it ended here," he replied. But as the bus engines roared to life, he realized something deeper. It hadn't ended. It had transformed. From silence to survival, from vanishing to return, from loss to love. And in that moment, Springfield finally exhaled.